So you've seen me draw this diagram before, hopefully. This says specific down here in case you can't read it, but you've seen me draw this diagram before, so general to specific. This is the idea of leading your reader from a larger kind of discussion into your specific point of view and the specific point of view of the essay. Because yes, this is, even though we've already talked about it in relation to our paragraphs, this is really what the introduction is focusing on. So the introduction is really going to hit hard this idea of up here of general. So another thing that you can think about the introduction is doing is it's providing context. It's basically saying, hey, here's an existing conversation that's being had about this topic. Now let me contribute to this conversation with my specific ideas, my specific point of view. So the idea is to provide context to your reader that there is this conversation that's happening. So a lot of times what I will say to help with this is if two people are having a conversation. I know you guys missed my drawing. So this is Richard and this is Anna or Anna, depending on how you would like to pronounce it. So they're having a conversation, chat. It's about a topic, say it's about gun control. Oof, touchy subject. So they're having a conversation about gun control. And this is you. And you walk up to them, and as soon as you walk up to them, you hear Anna, or Anna, I don't know why I picked that, say something rather alarming, but that's her perspective. And you're like, whoa, that's kind of out of nowhere. And Richard says, actually, it's not really out of nowhere. We've been talking about this. I'm like, what's this? Oh, we've been talking about gun control and the role of gun violence and blah, 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 blah. So this kind of stumbling upon this strange conversation is a little bit like what we would have if we just started with our paragraphs. So if we kept the idea of an essay, but instead of writing an introduction, we started with paragraph 1 and 2, right? So that was the first thing the reader saw. It would be very much like you stumbling onto this conversation and being like, cool. You didn't really provide any kind of information leading up to that. You just heard this one striking opinion, right? So the introduction is going to be Richard and Anna kind of catching you up. So like, actually, we've been talking about this, and here's some of the stuff that we mentioned, and you'll say, oh, your position or your statement that you just made makes more sense, right? So I don't know if that's helpful, but the general focus of the introduction is to create a sort of context. My lid. Is to provide a general sort of context for this larger specific discussion that we're having about obligation. So now you say, what is that general context? Well, if you wanted to go, and we've done this before, a version of this before, so you might be able to use some of your general statements within your paragraphs to help you craft and kind of even steal from those and use them in the introduction, because ultimately we're going to build an essay out of this. So you might be able to harvest some of those sentences from paragraphs 1 and 2 especially. All right, so if we were going to get really general, we would say that our essay deals with human interaction, right? That's a bit broad, but it does. So we could also say that it deals with reciprocal relationships. Run out of word. So reciprocal, I'm not running out of word, I'm running out of space. Reciprocal relationships. Those of you who are taking Spanish, I know right now you guys are studying reciprocal language. So this and that, and you say this when I'm talking about this, and I say this when I'm talking to you about this. So reciprocal is this idea of back and forth, right? So how I interact towards you and how you relate and interact back towards me. So reciprocal relationships, that's another general term for this. Obviously then we would move down to foreign relations. Foreign policy and relations is another general thing. Then obviously we would eventually get down to immigration, right? So if we wanted to start really broad, really general, we would go way back up here and we would say human interaction. Now, that's a little strange. So if you walked up to someone talking about immigration and they said that citizens have an obligation, and you said, whoa, what's the context of this? You wouldn't really expect or even want them to go back to, well, as Homo sapiens, throughout history, we have interacted with each other in a variety of ways. No, that's a bit much. There is going to be a certain element of awareness and knowledge that the common individual has towards immigration. So I would probably focus, if I was going to do this, I would probably start generally within this idea of, I might even start with reciprocal relationships, but I would probably start with immigration as a concept. So immigration as a general statement. Immigration has benefits. We could talk briefly about the benefits. We could talk briefly about the challenges. We could talk, if we were focusing specifically on citizens, if ours was the citizen assignment or the citizen role, we could say immigration benefits, challenges to citizenry. If we're the immigrants, we could talk about the benefits and the challenges to immigrants themselves. So if you want to focus specifically on the United States, that might be helpful, especially if in your paragraphs you already talk about this as being the primary location for your conversation, right? So I would probably start with immigration, benefits, challenges, the general status of immigration as an idea, as a policy, as a issue in America. Some people already have talked about this, the nation being divided, how there's immigration can cause division. Some people have focused on that, the numbers. So the numbers of immigrants, you've gone and found statistics referencing how many new immigrants are arriving. That helps to kind of create a context as well. And I'm not going to worry too much, right? This statistical numbers, unless it's coming from a specific study, I don't necessarily need you to quote this. But if you did find it and it was like based on so-and-so's research, then you might need to say, according to the research of blah, 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 this is the number of immigrants. But usually this is considered general knowledge or common information, general facts that you wouldn't need to cite, at least not for this assignment. So start, I would say, with something like this. I do think a certain mature or nuanced, kind of more complicated but also more rewarding would be to look at this idea of start out as looking at reciprocal social relationships. Now, if reciprocal is a strange word for you, you might obviously look it up on the internet or on the dictionary, but another way of looking at this would be, look at that spelling, would be mutual, right? So this is a little bit more of a common word, and they're very similar in the sense of how we're going to use them. So I do think that, especially if you're in honors, or even if you're in standard and you're just kind of looking for a challenge or a way to practice some deeper, complex structure and ideas, I would look at maybe starting here about just talking about what reciprocal social relationships exist and how maybe immigration is one example, right? So what are these? How do they play out in our society? And then one example of reciprocal relationships is blah, 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 blah.